What you're about to see has never happened outside Buckingham Palace. An FBI agent pulled a gun on a mounted royal guard, and the guard didn't even flinch. Why did he stay perfectly still, while a weapon was pointed straight at his chest? This moment nearly triggered an international incident and violated decades of royal protocol. Watch the agent's hand go to his holster, and the guard's horse doesn't even move. But what happened next left the embassy surrounded and the agent in cuffs. Now, before we reveal the full story, first, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. Buckingham Palace shimmered under a late summer haze, the kind of morning where the air already carried heat before the clock struck 9. By mid-morning, the forecourt would be packed wall to wall with tourists, their phones held high, all waiting for a glimpse of scarlet ceremony. But right now, it was the quiet hour, just before the chaos swelled, just before it all began. Lance Corporal Tristan Hale sat tall atop Ajax, the powerful black cavalry horse he'd trained with since his posting to the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment. At 31, Hale looked as statuesque as any man could while still breathing. His crimson tunic didn't shift, not even under the gentle breeze that swept down the mall. His white gloves rested loosely at his sides, his grip on the reins relaxed yet absolute. Ajax, ears flicking beneath the royal plume, shifted his weight once, then settled again. They were both used to standing still. To the crowds, he was just another guard, but Hale was not new to stillness. Afghanistan had taught him that stillness wasn't just ceremonial, it could mean life or death, waiting for a convoy that might never return, holding posture under fire so as not to give away your position. And now, years later, stillness had returned in a different uniform, but with the same demand: presence, patience, and total control. Behind the black visor of his helmet, Hale scanned everything, without ever moving his head. The trick wasn't learning how to stay still, the trick was knowing when stillness mattered more than reaction. To his left, tourists filtered in with the usual awe and distraction. A woman with a fold-out map tried to pronounce St. James's Park to her impatient child. An elderly man carried a miniature Union Jack, already flapping even though there was no wind. A steward by the rope line tried, half-heartedly, to keep visitors from leaning over the barrier. Hale noted all of it and kept scanning. That's when he noticed the black SUV. It had pulled into an unauthorized turning loop just ahead of the ministry access gate. Not unusual for visiting diplomats, but this one had no proper flag marker, and the driver remained inside with the engine idling. A man had stepped out, broad-shouldered, American by the cut of the suit and the lack of ceremony in his stride. He wasn't lost, he wasn't dawdling, he was watching the guard, and Hale, without moving a muscle, was already watching him back. The man from the SUV didn't walk like a tourist. He moved like someone used to being listened to, quick, deliberate, impatient with ceremony. His sunglasses reflected the gilded railings of Buckingham Palace, and even in a city as used to diplomats as London, there was something off-putting about his presence. He cut across the palace pedestrian lane without hesitation, ignoring the warning signs posted on polished brass. A palace steward, a thin, wiry man named Andrew, who'd worked the grounds for 8 years, stepped forward with a courteous but firm tone. "I'm sorry, sir, this area's restricted to invited." "I'm with the US Federal Service," the man said, flashing a badge too quickly for it to be verified. "The briefing's at 10. I'm not late, you're in my way." Andrew took a reflexive step back, not because of the badge, but because of the tone. Agent Marcus Webb didn't slow down. He was already scanning ahead, looking for entrances, cameras, and threats that weren't there. Hale's position, mounted, central, unmoving, seemed to aggravate him more than anything else, as if the guard's presence was a challenge in itself. Webb stopped a few feet from Hale and stared up at him. "Serious get-up," he muttered under his breath. No response. "You actually know how to use that thing?" he asked louder, gesturing vaguely toward the ceremonial sword at Hale's hip. "Or is this one of those look scary and stand still gigs?" Still nothing. To Webb, it was irritating. To the crowd nearby, it was typical British pageantry. A boy in a baseball cap elbowed his friend. "Bet he can't even blink. They probably make them wear diapers." The friends giggled, then moved on. But Webb stayed. He stepped even closer, now within 2 meters of Ajax's flank. The horse tensed slightly, eyes narrowing. Hale registered it immediately, but gave no external sign. "Must be nice," Webb said. "Get to dress up, ride a horse, get paid to stare into space while the rest of us are actually protecting people." Still no response. Webb leaned forward slightly and lowered his voice. "I was on site at Kandahar when they pulled the bodies out. You don't know what pressure looks like, pal. This ? This is just a costume party." Behind his sunglasses, Hale's eyes shifted once. Not much. Just a single recalibration of gaze. From middle distance to the man directly before him. That was all. Webb didn't like it. "Yeah," he scoffed. "Thought so." Then Ajax exhaled loudly and stamped once on the ground, a sharp clop against the stone that startled a few tourists nearby. Webb stepped back instinctively. His hand drifted almost unconsciously toward the back of his blazer, where the weight of his service weapon rested. And just like that, the morning shifted. The tourists were still clicking photos when the mood changed. It wasn't sudden, not a scream, not a bang, but more like a ripple through the air, something unseen, felt before it was understood. Agent Marcus Webb's hand had stopped hovering. It was now firmly wrapped around the grip of his holstered sidearm. He unlatched the retention snap with practiced motion and drew. Shouts erupted from nearby. Several tourists screamed, others ducked or froze mid-step. A mother pulled her child behind a column. A steward's walkie-talkie crackled to life with panicked calls. And in the dead centre of it all, still high on horseback, was Lance Corporal Tristan Hale. Webb didn't raise the weapon all the way at first. He held it low, angled toward Ajax's front legs, but his body screamed aggression. His voice barked out like an officer running a checkpoint. "State your name and post! Identify yourself now!" Hale didn't move. The sword at his side gleamed faintly, catching the morning sun, but it remained sheathed. Ajax shifted again, more alert now, his nostrils flaring wide with each breath. "You deaf?" Webb yelled, raising the weapon higher, this time pointing squarely at Hale's chest. "You don't make a move or a sound. Fine, I'll treat you like a threat. Last warning." And still, Hale said nothing. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. He sat with the same poise he'd carried through Afghanistan when convoys vanished in the desert heat, and no one knew which ridgeline might explode. This wasn't bravado. It was calculation. It was trust, in training, in instinct, in the weight of the institution that surrounded him. People all around were backing away, but one child's voice rose clear above the crowd. "Mummy, why is he pointing the gun at the horse?" The question cut through the chaos like a hymn. Innocent, disarming. And for the first time since drawing his weapon, Webb hesitated. His stance wasn't that of a man defending a perimeter anymore. It was the twitchy, raw posture of someone who realized too late that the room wasn't agreeing with him. "Get back!" he shouted, waving his free hand at the onlookers. "Step away from the barrier." But no one moved closer. No one wanted proximity now, not to him, not to the man with the gun. Inside the palace's control office, radio chatter exploded. "Code 9, near the forecourt. Armed suspect. Possible security breach. Civilian presence high. Response units mobilizing." Stewards were guiding people back with shaking hands, trying to stay calm, trying to look like this was routine. And still, at the center of it all, Hale remained unmoved. His horse was agitated but trained, just like the man riding him. Neither gave way. Webb's hands were slick now. He hadn't noticed how fast his breathing had become. A minute passed, then another, and still no word from the guard. Then something subtle, almost imperceptible, shifted in Hale's stance. Not a flinch, not a movement, but a presence. He was no longer a still statue to mock or challenge. He was now the focal point of a standoff, the calm within the storm. And the fact that he hadn't spoken only made him more powerful. In that moment, Webb realized something terrifying. He was the only one moving. Everyone else, guards, tourists, staff, had frozen around him, which meant he was the only threat and the only target. In the long, silent spaces between chaos and command, time behaves differently. To Marcus Webb, it felt like the world had stalled, like no one was doing anything. Like the UK authorities had frozen, leaving him exposed in an open plaza with a non-responding guard who might at any moment pull a hidden weapon or signal something worse. But that was only his perception. In reality, everything was already in motion. Behind palace windows, radios buzzed with encrypted MOD frequencies. Across the nearby ministry compound, 2 tactical vehicles were rerouting toward the northeast arch. At the Wellington Barracks, less than 400 metres away, a commander from the Royal Military Police was already slipping on his vest. Hale knew all of this, not the specifics but the tempo. He'd stood sentry at the edge of Camp Bastion when Afghan soldiers had defected mid-patrol. He knew the difference between tension that breaks and tension that bends. And right now, what Webb didn't understand was that he'd already crossed a line. It wasn't just that he'd drawn a weapon. It was that he'd done it on Crown ground, against an unarmed ceremonial figure. A figure whose power didn't come from aggression or authority, but from stillness, from presence. The tourists had stopped filming, or rather, they were still holding up phones, but not for show anymore. There was a reverence now, something almost sacred in the air. They weren't waiting for entertainment, they were witnessing a threshold being tested. Webb, still pointing his weapon, was breathing too hard. His stance wobbled. His mouth was half open as he tried to summon another order, another demand, but nothing came, because the man on the horse wouldn't move. And in the crowd, just past the 3rd row of railings, a voice whispered, "They train for this. He's not allowed to speak unless it's life or death." A mother nodded quietly. "I think this is life or death." Webb's eyes darted from Hale to the bystanders. Their expressions weren't afraid anymore. They were waiting. Why? Because they knew something he didn't. Across the square, a black bird shot into the air from the Royal Mews. Webb turned toward the movement, briefly distracted. And that's when Hale shifted, a single breath deeper, shoulders drawing back, chin rising just slightly. Ajax responded in kind, his weight redistributing as if something invisible had snapped to attention between them. Not a step, not a command, just readiness. Webb took half a step back, and that was enough. Hale had seen it before in other men, on other days, when they realized they were no longer in control of the room. 3 minutes had passed since the weapon came out, and without saying a word, without raising a hand, the guard had reversed the balance of power. He hadn't needed to win the moment, he just needed to survive it until the institution arrived, and it was already here. The first sign came not with sirens, but silence. The kind of trained, premeditated hush that rolls in like storm clouds behind tinted windows. 3 unmarked black Land Rovers appeared at the Eastern Service Road, moving in formation, gliding over cobblestones with a confidence that said everything. No panic, no blaring lights, just precision. Doors opened before the tyres even stopped. Out stepped the MOD Tactical Intervention Unit. 6 officers geared in black, with low-profile armour and sidearms at the ready, fanned into position. They didn't shout, they didn't posture. They moved with the quiet speed of people who didn't need to prove anything. At their centre strode Captain Hannah Rees, early 40s, ceremonial officer turned operations lead for the palace's emergency response branch. She didn't wear body armor, just her regulation blues and a radio strapped across her chest. Her stride was calm, boots crunching faintly over the plaza gravel. She approached the perimeter without drawing a weapon. Her voice was low and direct. "Sir, you are trespassing on restricted Crown grounds and aiming a live firearm at a uniformed representative of the British Armed Forces. Lower the weapon and step away." Webb spun toward her, eyes wide. He hadn't seen them coming. His weapon dipped, but didn't drop. "Back off," he warned, trying to reassert control. "I'm a US federal agent. I have jurisdiction under AE. You have no jurisdiction on sovereign UK soil," Reese said sharply, her tone still flat, but now edged with command, especially not within 100 meters of a serving guard on active ceremonial post. Behind her, MOD officers closed the outer circle, their positions triangulated for clean lines of fire. A second team moved through the crowd, subtly shielding civilians behind barriers. No panic, just procedure. Webb's eyes darted. The tourists weren't moving anymore. No one was cheering. No one was speaking. All that was left was Hale, still atop Ajax, still perfectly motionless, still staring just past Webb's right shoulder as if the man didn't exist. Reese took one step closer. "You need to lower your weapon," she said again, quieter now, "before someone else does it for you." Webb hesitated. He wasn't used to being the one outmaneuvered. And then Hale did something subtle, but catastrophic. He took one step forward, just one. Ajax followed with trained grace, hooves striking once on the stone, deliberate and sharp. The crowd gasped, not because it was violent, but because it was final. It was the first time the guard had moved, and it wasn't retreat. It was reclaiming. Webb faltered, his grip loosened. And in that half-second of doubt, one of Reese's sergeants moved in from behind, swift, practiced, absolute. The gun was gone from Webb's hand before he even felt the disarm. His arms were pinned, plastic restraints locked in place with a cold snap. He was no longer the one giving orders. Webb's hands were behind his back now, bound tight. His mouth opened with the instinctive fury of someone used to authority. Someone who'd never been publicly neutralized before. "This is a mistake. You're detaining an active US federal officer on diplomatic oversight. I'm covered under SOFA protocol and transatlantic security provisions. You pointed a loaded weapon at a ceremonial guard who hadn't moved," Captain Reese interrupted coldly. "You're not protected from consequences, you're protected from prosecution. There's a difference." She waved over two MOD constables. "Escort him to the response vehicle. He's not to speak to anyone until the embassy liaison arrives." Webb tried to shout back. Something about jurisdiction, misunderstanding, protocol. But the words came out jagged and thin, the kind of defense spoken not to clarify but to save face. No one listened. As the officers walked him briskly toward the tactical vehicle, Reese turned and looked back at Hale. The guard hadn't moved since his single reclaiming step. He now stood once again in formation, sword still sheathed, eyes still locked at ceremonial midpoint. Ajax, steady as ever, flicked his tail once in a slow arc and stilled. "You held," Reese said, more to herself than anyone else. She stepped forward, closer now, speaking low enough that only Hale could hear. "He would have fired if you'd twitched, and yet you didn't." There was no reply. She didn't expect one. "Your posture held longer than our perimeter response time," she added, quietly impressed. 3 minutes, 12 seconds? Not bad. Still, Hale said nothing. Reese gave the barest of nods and stepped back. "We'll take it from here." Nearby, tourists remained frozen in place, awed, confused, shaken. They had no script for what they'd just seen. A few had filmed it. Others had instinctively lowered their phones when the gun came out. But all of them, every single one, had stopped treating the guard as a living statue the moment that pistol was drawn. Because in that moment, something had become terrifyingly, beautifully clear. The guard wasn't there for show. He was there to hold the line. One child, the same girl who had asked about the horse, tugged on her father's sleeve. "Is he okay?" Her father, visibly shaken, nodded. He never moved. A woman at the rope line wiped her eyes. A man nearby removed his cap. A steward whispered into his walkie, "Incident contained. No civilian injuries. Suspect in MOD custody. Guard unaffected." And still Hale stood tall, as though the past 10 minutes had never happened, as though the weight of a drawn weapon hadn't pressed inches from his heart, because that was the difference between theatrics and duty. When the uniform holds meaning, motion isn't always the answer. Stillness is. By midday, the footage had already been reviewed from 6 different angles. Palace security didn't work in hypotheticals. Every corner of the forecourt was filmed, every breach time-stamped, every second of that 3-minute standoff analysed frame by frame. Agent Marcus Webb, still in restraints, now sat in a conference room deep beneath the Ministry of Defence, surrounded by silence and 2 stone-faced liaison officers. Across the table sat a legal attaché from the US Embassy, young, flushed, and radiating regret. "I need to be clear," she said, placing both palms flat on the table. "The incident occurred within a sovereign ceremonial perimeter. You drew a weapon on a royal guard in full uniform who did not move or provoke you. That is a catastrophic diplomatic error." Webb shifted. He was non-responsive. It looked off. He stepped at me. "He stepped once," she corrected, "after you drew." A long pause. This doesn't go away with a badge flash. In another part of Whitehall, a closed-door meeting convened between senior MOD officials, 2 embassy security advisors, and Captain Hannah Rees. The conclusion was swift and quiet. Marcus Webb would be stripped of all armed access while in the UK and placed on immediate return rotation. His clearance would be flagged. No press would be informed, but internally he would never work a London post again. Outside, the streets remained calm. There were no headlines, no international incident declarations, just whispers among staff, embassy guards speaking in hushed tones, and stewards comparing notes behind brass doors. But in the heart of the palace, something else shifted. That afternoon, the palace released a rare internal memorandum, distributed quietly to security teams, military liaisons, and senior protocol staff. It read only, "Let this serve as reaffirmation of the silent standard upheld by the Royal Guard. Their strength lies not in motion but in mastery. The line does not falter. No photos were published, no names released, but those who were there remembered everything." One woman, exiting the palace gift shop hours later, saw the guard, still standing unchanged, exactly where he'd been that morning. She paused, clutching her souvenir bag, and said to her husband, "He never even blinked, did he?" "No," he replied, and yet somehow he said everything. At the American embassy, the fallout took a different shape. Diplomats scrambled to distance themselves from Webb's actions, citing lack of authorization, extreme stress, even cultural misunderstanding. But the truth was simpler. He had drawn a gun on a soldier who never moved, and the institution had moved in response. As quietly as it had begun, the day returned to normal. Tourists filtered back into the plaza. Guards rotated posts. Horses marched in choreographed rhythm. The sun never changed, but something else had. The next shift, every new guard stepped a little taller onto the forecourt, not because of pride, but because the world had just been reminded who they were. The changing of the guard happened right on schedule that afternoon, as if nothing had happened. And that was exactly how Lance Corporal Tristan Hale preferred it. Hours later, the sun was beginning to dip behind the rooftops as Hale stepped into the cool of the Wellington Barracks armoury. The scent of saddle soap, brass polish and leather permeated the air. He'd already unsaddled Ajax with practiced care, brushing down the horse in quiet rhythm, checking every hoof, every strap, every buckle. Ceremony didn't end when the crowds went home. It just changed clothes. He peeled off his white gloves last, folding them once, then again, and placing them neatly beside his cleaned bridle. Across the locker row, Private Mahir leaned back on a bench, still wide-eyed. "I saw the footage," he said. "He pointed the gun right at you, and you didn't even flinch." Hale didn't answer right away. He unlaced one boot slowly, methodically, as if replaying the moment in his own mind. Mahir continued, "I mean, I know we're trained not to react, but that wasn't a drunk tourist yelling, 'Oi!' That was an American federal agent. You ever think he might actually pull the trigger?" Hale straightened, meeting the young soldier's gaze with quiet clarity. "I've had worse pointed at me," he said simply. A beat passed. "In Helmand," Hale added, voice flat. "They don't yell first." Mahir sat up, his face sobering. He nodded once, respectfully, and didn't ask again. Later that evening, as Hale stood alone in the stable's outer corridor, Ajax resting in his stall behind him, he heard the click of polished shoes on concrete. Captain Reese appeared at the far end, her uniform jacket slung over one shoulder, a folder tucked under her arm. She didn't say anything at first, just stopped a few feet away and looked at him. "I reviewed the footage again," she said eventually. "The crowd didn't see it, but your fingers twitched, just once on the second minute." Hale raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. "I'm not reprimanding you," she added, "just noting it. Most men would have dropped the reins or said something. You twitched once." He exhaled softly. "The horse tensed. I told him to hold." Reese looked toward Ajax's stall, then back to him. "Well," he listened. She gave a slight nod of acknowledgement, one professional to another, and turned to leave. But just before disappearing into the corridor's shadow, she paused. "You won't be mentioned in the report," she said, "but we'll remember." Hale nodded once, alone again in the fading light. Stillness didn't mean emptiness, it meant endurance. The next morning the forecourt filled again. The sun was softer, the crowds thinner. But the atmosphere lingered, quiet, attentive, a little more reverent than usual. No signs had been posted, no announcements made, and yet somehow everyone there seemed to know something had happened. Lance Corporal Tristan Hale resumed his ceremonial mount with the same precision as always. Ajax moved through formation like clockwork, every hoof a measured beat against the stones. The city may have carried on, but those who had witnessed the previous day's standoff hadn't. At the rope line, a family stood in quiet observation. The little girl from the day before, the one who'd asked about the horse, clutched a folded flower she'd made from a napkin. With solemn care, she handed it to a nearby steward. "It's for him," she said, pointing at Hale. "For being brave." The steward accepted it with a faint smile and placed it at the base of the ceremonial post, just beside the boot-scuffed stone where Hale had taken his single step forward. Her father knelt beside her and whispered, "That's the man from yesterday." He didn't even blink when the bad man pointed a gun. She nodded quietly. The horse didn't either. A few steps away, an older couple paused mid-photo. The husband lowered his camera, unusually still. "I was here when it happened," he murmured. "Didn't film it, didn't think to. Just watched." His wife touched his arm gently. Sometimes that's the only way to understand it. More people trickled in as the day warmed. Some spoke softly, recounting details of the incident as though sharing the location of a quiet shrine. Others simply stood, taking in the image of the mounted guard with new eyes, not as decoration, not as tradition, but as a man, a soldier, a presence. One teenage boy, half embarrassed, turned to his mate. "I used to think they were just posers, standing there for tourists." His friend nodded slowly. "Yeah, not anymore." At precisely 11, the Palace Brass Band began its march up the Mall. Music filled the air again. Cameras clicked, children pointed. But even among the laughter and motion, something quieter endured. No one shouted at the guard that day. No one tried to make him laugh. And when Hale's eyes swept slowly, imperceptibly across the line of visitors, he met no ridicule, only acknowledgement. Nothing dramatic, just quiet understanding between strangers who now knew exactly what it meant when a soldier doesn't move. If you were standing in that crowd, would you have trusted the guard's silence? Or do you think he should have spoken just once to de-escalate the moment? And here's the big one. When someone threatens tradition with force, is discipline still the strongest response? Let us know what you think in the comments. We read every single one and always want to hear your take. If this story moved you, hit that like button. It really helps us out more than you know. Subscribe and tap the bell icon so you don't miss tomorrow's upload. We post stories like this every single day, each one revealing the real strength behind the uniform. And if you know someone who thinks royal guards are just statues in fancy coats, send them this video. It might just change their mind. Your next Royal Guard story is already up on screen. Click it now, and we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, with another story that speaks for itself.